to learn about the details of the try except statement and how to handle exceptions in Python. To refresh your memory, here is the slide from the previous lesson which shows the general format of the try except statement. As you can see, to use a try except statement, you start by a try keyword, which is followed by some statements. Then it will be followed by one or more except statements. Then it may be followed by an else, and at the end, it can be followed by an optional finally keyword. Now let's see how does the try except statement works. First, the statements between try and except keywords are executed. If no exception occurs, then the except clause is skipped and the statements in the else are executed. If an exception occurs, then the rest of the clause is skipped and the corresponding except clause is executed. An except clause with no exception handles any kind of exception. And if a finally clause exists, the statement in the finally clause will always be executed. Let's see some examples of different kinds of exceptions. The first example is name error exception. This exception happens when a local or global name is not found. Consider a very simple program with 2 lines only. The first line is x is equal to y plus 2, and the second line says print x. If you run this program, you will get an error, because in the first line, when Python tries to add y plus 2, it notices that the variable y has not been defined before, so it cannot find the value corresponding to the variable y. And that is why you get name error. Notice that even though the code is syntactically correct, Python raised a name error exception in the execution time because y was not defined. Here is another example of the zero division error exception. Zero division error occurs when a number is divided by 0. This is an example with a simple program with 2 lines. In the first line, x is equal to 0, and in the second line, z is equal to 5 divided by x. It is obvious that when Python tries to execute this program, even though it is syntactically correct, when it tries to divide 5 by 0, it will raise a zero division error exception. Now let me talk about the else clause. The try except statement has an optional else clause, which must come after all the except clauses. It is useful for code that must be executed if the try clause does not raise an exception. In this example, in the try clause, I try to open a file. If the file does not exist, or if there is an error when the file is tried to be opened, then you get an IO error exception. And in that case, you will print the fact that could not open the file. Else, you read from the file and print the data. Notice that the else clause will only be executed if no exception occurs. You can add an optional finally clause at the end of the try except statement. The finally clause will always be executed no matter if you have an exception or not. Usually the purpose of the finally clause is to clean up your code if it is needed. I am going to show you some examples of exception handling using the Python environment. Here I have a program which I will try to open a file for read. If an exception happens, then I will print that I could not open the file. Else, I will read from the file, then I will print the data which was read from the file, then I will close the file. I also have created a file called test_file.txt, and the content of this file, as you can see, are 4 simple lines. Now, if I try to run this program, you see that my program reads the file, then prints the data and closes the file, and here is what it has printed. Now imagine that I made a mistake, and rather than calling the name of the file test_file, I forgot to put the underscore here. So the name of the file is testfile.txt and the file does not exist. So what happens when you run this program? your program tries to open the file, and since it cannot find the file, it will raise an exception. That exception would be an I/O error exception. And when that happens, then your printf statement will be printed and it says could not open the file. Notice that the else statement in this program is optional. I did not have to have an else statement. However, if I did not have an else statement and all of these statements were not tabbed here, imagine what would happen if I run my program now. If the file exists and I run the program and nothing goes wrong, nothing is changed and everything is correct. However, if I get an I/O error, for example, if I could not open the file, guess what happens? You get an error. The reason is that Python tries to open a file. Since it cannot open the file, it goes to the except and prints that it could not open the file, which is here. Then Python comes to this line. So even though it wasn't able to open the file, you will try to read from the file, and that would create another error because at this point, the variable fp is not defined and you will get a name error. So you can see what is the purpose of the else statement in the try except. Here is another example of exception handling by using two except clauses. In this program, in the first line, I am asking the user to enter a number other than 0. Remember that no matter what the user enters, either a number or a string, the output of the input function would be a string type. I will convert that to a float number, and then I will try to divide 10 by the user number and assign it to a variable p. I should mention that this program does not do anything in particular, and it is only an example of how to use try except statements. If I run this program and the user enters a 0, the program responds by divide by 0 error and prints done. The reason for that is when Python tries to divide 10 by y, since the value of y is 0, it gets 0 division error and jumps to this statement which prints the divide by 0 error. And after this, it will execute the finally statement because no matter what happens, finally statement would always be executed and prints the done. What if I run the program and the user, rather than typing a number, inputs something like hello here? When you try to convert hello to a float number, you get an error which is a value error. And in that case, Python goes to the corresponding except statement and prints this statement which says cannot convert your number to float, and then goes to done. There are two more things that I would like to show you. The first one is that in front of the except statements, I can use multiple exception types. For example, I could have used only one exception and then deleted this whole statement here. That means when a 0 division error happens or a value error happens, Python comes here and all it does, it just says simply error. If you run this program again, if you put the proper number here, everything is okay and nothing goes wrong. However, if the user puts a 0 as the response, then Python says error and it says done. If I run it again, and if the user puts some characters in here, then Python also says error and it says done. The second thing that I was going to tell you is that you may decide not to put any of the exception types in front of the except. So when an exception happens, no matter which type it is, Python comes to this except clause and executes the statements which are following this except clause. This table shows the most common exceptions that you may encounter. I should mention that there are many more exceptions in Python, and for a complete list, you can refer to Python documentation in python.org site. What did you learn in this lesson? You learned how to handle basic exceptions in Python by using the try except statement. You also learned about the optional else and finally clauses in the try except statement.